One is Mr. Shankar Sharma, whom I know personally also and has been my mentor. And the other person is Patricia. We also know her since last few weeks. I will introduce her formally when we are close to her presentation. So I would like to invite Mr. Shankar Sharma, and then also I would like to introduce him very briefly. Um, Mr. Shankar Sharma is basically coming from an electrical engineer background, and now for a very long time, nearly 4 decades, he worked on power sector as a professional, not only in India and also an international level like New Zealand, Australia, and all. So now he is based uh, in Karnataka. There's something called Western Ghats, which is ecologically sensitive region. And professionally, Mr. Shankar Sharma has been contributed to many books and reports and many papers he's presented. And his uh, activism, I'm really very impressed and inspired by his activism. That is, uh, he keeps writing letters to various people in constitutional positions and policymakers regularly with all the issues. So my mailbox is full of these letters. So that is one activism for us, how we take it. And so one example of his contribution is like Karnataka government. There is something called Pollution Control Board. That Pollution Control Board has commissioned Mr. Shankar Sharma to come up with recommendations for the action plan on climate change based on statewide consultations and internal studies. So it is a very thick report. So it takes about nearly a week to go through. There are hundreds of recommendations to not only concentrating on Karnataka state, but also it is good for the nation and also the global situation. And today he will be speaking, on the subject called Power for People. And it is broadly is speaking on the role of energy and environmental disruptions. So without wasting much time, I invite Mr. Shankar Sharma to present his points. And we will have about 40, 45, 40 minutes, 45 minutes. If he sees it as less time for him to put his points, but he will try. And then we will have about 20 minutes maybe, or 15 minutes of question and answers if students are, have many questions. And then we will have 15 minutes of break as we generally do. And then we will have Patricia's presentation. So I invite Mr. Shankar Sharma for his presentation.
Okay, Aruna, thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I understand there are a large number of students. I don't know how many of them are there. Can you see that, Aruna? Can you see my slide presentation?
No.
Hello. Can you see my slide presentation? That's what I wanted to know. Is it
No,
visible?
we don't.
We have to share it again.
Okay, share it again.
We cannot.
So we will have to do the same exercise again.
Okay.
That green button on the lower bar.
From the beginning.
Yeah.
Is it okay now?
No, it is not come.
Okay.
That green button, share button.
I did that. Okay. Share.
Yeah.
it's shared, but now how do I go back there and make it?
Mhm.
Is it visible now?
No,
Is
it is
my
not. It is not. I think you will have. Yes, it is. Yes.
is it okay? Is it in the PowerPoint presentation format? Is it okay?
You have to select PowerPoint window. So now you are showing Zoom. You have to you have to open PowerPoint. Yes, there you are.
Is it clear now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. I'm at the beginning. Is it visible now?
Yes, visible.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Good afternoon again. Especially my interest is to talk to the youngsters. I don't know how many of them are there, but people like me who have been in the field for a number of decades, we are very interested to talk to youngsters basically because the future is in their hands. So we would like to pass on as much of our knowledge and concern as possible without overwhelming them, basically to encourage them to look around them in addition to their professional studies and duties, and what can be done at the global level. And Aruna has chosen my electrical engineering background to talk about how to balancing the economic growth of a nation and also, of course, at the global level, keeping the environmental sustainability in the context and looking at all these things from the energy sector. That is the one. Now, what is sustainability? Now, Aruna and others there, if you have any difficulty to hear me, I try to go as slowly as possible so that so as to enable me to complete all of that. But if there is any problem in audio and all that, please let me know. At the global level, sustainable development is considered to be an approach to growth and human development, and that aims to meet the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This is incredibly important, because we are able to meet our needs now, most sections of our society, but is that really going to compromise the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs? The scientists all over the world, they are afraid of such a necessity because they think that if we continue with what we are doing now in the business as usual scenario, the future generations may not be able to meet even the basic needs. And having been studying all these things and reading, discussing with people like Aruna and others who are in different areas of expertise, I have my own doubt whether most sections of our society will be able to meet their own needs even beyond 2050, let alone in the future. So that's the issue there. So the aim of sustainability is to have a society where living conditions and resources meet human needs without undermining the planetary integrity. Planetary integrity is considered to be that one where all environmental resources are continuously healthy and meet our basic needs without harming themselves to an irreversible condition. Sustainable development aims to balance the needs of the economy, environment, and social well being. This is very important. Why energy is such an issue? Energy basically because, let's go back. Energy usage can be considered sustainable if it meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations. Same thing. The sustainability in all these terms means similar thing. Basically, sustainability means doing what we are doing now or what we want to do now for the sake of the present generations, but keeping in mind that that should not compromise the needs of the future generation. This is very important. So we cannot consider economic growth unless it is also sustainable environmentally. So this diagram may give a good picture. See, this is society, this is environment, this is economic. So all these three would be sustainably benefited only if they are in consonance with each other. Another figure is here, larger environment, this is planet, our societies, and within that economy. The same thing. And put it in a different fashion, there's three pillars of the sustainability building: social justice, environmental justice, and economic justice. Put it in another way, if you look at the planet Earth, we require the social justice. Same thing with environmental justice also has to happen. Economic justice, I don't know how much detail I can go into that. This any of even probably like Aruna can talk about these issues for days and days together. So we have to find via media where we can be time conscious and also put it across the drive the issues. Environmental sustainability can be seen as the ability to maintain an ecological balance in our planet's natural environment and conserve natural resources to support the well-being of current and future generations. So basically, we have inherited this planetary thing from our forefathers: forests, oceans, freshwater sources, minerals, air. They are in the. For example, if you take a situation like 1900, when the concerns were not at all there about the environment, concerns were there, but it was not the global level. Considering that as a sort of basic point, either 1800 or 1900, we have come far, far away, and we are in a very disturbing scenario right now. For economic growth, as we all know, we need clean air, adequate quantity and quality of fresh water, and fertile soil as basic, and other ingredients like forests, rivers, flora, fauna, microorganisms, minerals, oceans, mangroves, freshwater bodies, they're all required. And all these should be available to every one of us for all times to come. That is important about the sustainability. There is a clear relationship between economic growth and environmental sustainability, because economic growth needs land, water, energy, clean air, various raw materials, and all these around us in the form of environment provide us, but they must be available sustainably for the present as well as future generation. That is the whole crux of environmental sustainability and the relationship between economic growth and energy. Why we are choosing energy, we'll come to you slightly. There is another important slide. See, there are three circles: environment, which conserve air, water, land, biodiversity, climate, minerals, energy. There is social sector: food, shelter, clothing, recreation, culture. There is also economic sector: production, processing, marketing, transportation, then investment, development, communications, etc. Now, all these activities will become sustainable only when all these three sectors have a harmonious relationship with each other. For example, if we look at environment and social sectors, waste management, resource management on a sustainable basis, the property rights can be one example. Between environment and economics, the full cost accounting, liability issues, regulations are important. And between social and economic sectors, consumer awareness, community development, food security are also important. Similarly, all these sectors have cross linkage with the other two sectors, and all of them have to go hand in hand for sustainable development for years and decades to come. Now, I don't know how much are our students now aware of global warming, but to be on safer side, I want to touch on some few larger issues. As one of the faculty members said, the youngsters of the day, they are much more aware of these issues around them than when people like me were students 4 or 5 decades ago. But still, to put these things issues in proper perspective, global warming is the increase in the average temperature of the Earth's near surface air and oceans in recent decades and its projected continuation. For example, global average temperature at 1800 AD was about 14 degrees Celsius. This is average global temperature considering oceans, surface air, and other aspects of our nature. Now, greenhouse gas emissions are a very efficient trappers of the sun's heat. What happens is sun's heat comes through this atmosphere, hits the earth, and as much of that is used. And what is happening here is because of the global warming gases, a thick layer of gas is surrounding earth. The incoming sun rate has a higher frequency, so that heat rays can pass through that. But when they hit the surface of the earth, when they get reflected, they have a frequency of different nature. Because of that, they can't escape easily from the greenhouse gases. The result is the average temperature of the earth is going up. As per IPCC's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the greenhouse gases are water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, so many of them, sulfur, hexafluoride also. What are the main sources of greenhouse gases and due to human activities? One is burning of fossil fuels and deforestation, and livestock and paddy rice farming, land use, wetland, pipeline losses in gas, and covered vented landfill emissions, etc. There is also agricultural activities. Now we can continue with many of these issues. The crux here is the Global Panel on Science, it is called as IPCC, and the other scientific communities, they believe that we must be able to retain the increase in global temperature not more than 1.5 degrees above that 14 degrees, that is pre-industrial scenario, in order to continue to have an acceptable climate on the planet. So that's the issue. The emission that cause climate change come from every part of the world and affect everyone, but some countries produce much more than others. The seven biggest emitters globally: China, USA, India, European Union, Indonesia, Russian Federation, and Brazil, etc. Now, what are the effects of climate change? The reason why I'm coming to climate change in the first instance is, if you understand how humanity is impacted and how it can be linked to the energy, it will be much easier to understand, appreciate those issues. So some of the effects of climate change, major ones are hotter temperatures, much hotter temperatures. Last 2-3 years, we are seeing very heat extremes in USA, many parts of Europe, and certainly in India. More severe storms, increased droughts and floods, unseasonal rains, reduced agricultural output, raising sea levels, loss of species, mass migration and climate change migration. People are already migrating from one part of the world or even within one country to another part of the country, basically because of environmental reasons. There will be increased poverty and displacement, and of course, water wars. Some of the slides here, they make self-abundant, too much of water, drought, now raising sea level. Please, this is very important. This particular slide impacts me very much. I think this is from a part of Bangladesh. As we know, Bangladesh has most of its coastal area very low. Now, these people have been doing agriculture for a number of centuries. Now, because of the rise in temperature, rise in sea level, they are already inundated. It's happening different parts of the world also, and it happens in certain parts of India also. So this is where the social justice comes into picture. This is a picture of a street in urban area, one of the cities. See how much of water is going through the roads. This is another area which strikes us. This is just a pictorial representation of an island sort of thing, with all high-rise buildings and all that surrounded by ocean. What happens? Because this is a low-lying area, global warming increases, sea level increases, and what will happen to these people here? This is another very touching picture. This is some urban area. This lady and her family members have come in a car to get water from a subterranean tap or whatever it is. See, this car, the affluence doesn't really matter as long as these issues are not available. Being rich is not a guarantee for assured water supply. See, this is very horrible. Look at that. This poor lady is taking water from a roadside nala in a city somewhere where it is. So what is the social injustice in such sort of development? So you can see in the background, it's a city, a well-paved road, people are going around, and it's a necessity. But what about this such people? Such people, when they were living in natural environments, say a few decades ago, near forests or non-urban areas, they were independent. They had access to water, they had access to forest, they were content, they were not asking anything from the society, but we have deprived them of even the basics one. The question here is, let's look at the impact of energy and material usage on planet's health. This is a diagram from IPCC fifth assessment report, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It may take some time to address that, but let's look at this. The idea here is looking at the energy, how energy is impacting. See, this circle here, it talks about various sectors, how much different sectors of our economy are contributing to global warming. For example, energy sector is energy and heat production alone is giving 25% of the GHG. Okay, and this one is other forms of energy usage in industry, then transport, building. See, this is the thing. Almost all energy is a major contributor to the global greenhouse housing effect, and the present focus. Sorry, can you hear me all right? It says my internet connection is not reliable. Anyway, so the energy has a major impact. See, if you look at these things, these are the major subsectors of energy which are impacting climate change. Now, if you look at the annual greenhouse gas emissions by different sectors, if you look at just three of them, for example, fossil fuel, then waste disposal management, industrial processing, transportation, it's a considerable. At a global level, see another slide below here is, it's about carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. Scientists have compiled how much of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is contributed by which sector. Same thing with methane. Methane is probably, I don't know how many of you know, methane is a highly potent greenhouse gas emissions. Its potency is much more than that of carbon dioxide or nitrous oxide. Methane is around 80 times more potent than carbon dioxide to contribute to the global warming. But fortunately, the methane is in smaller quantities, and methane as a gas lives in the atmosphere for a shorter duration. So this is another slide sent to me by, shared with me by Aruna. This is a graph starting at 1800 AD. Now we are at 2022. So this is the amount of energy, total global energy consumed. See, between 1800 approximately up to 1850, it is almost very negligible or zero. It slowly started increasing. By 1900, it was there. So by 2022, you can see it has gone up by about 160,000 times. If it is zero here, from here, it's about 160,000 times. The energy consumption has tremendously increased. Now, if you look at the global oil energy consumption, see this 33% of the global energy is because of the consumption in oil, 27% is through coal, and 24% through gas. Now, these three put together comes to around 84%. They are called as fossil fuels, and their contribution to GHG is much worse than any other sector. Now, what is do we have an energy emergency at the global? I believe so. What are the factors? 87% of the global energy comes from fossil fuels, even now, 87%. And about 70% of annual GHG emissions are associated with energy usage alone. And still, even in 2024, about 1.3 billion people around the world are without electricity, and some of them have barely enough. Thermoelectric energy, like including coal, nuclear, and are the fastest growing even now. They're also threatening freshwater resources because they demand fresh water in huge quantities, especially coal, nuclear, and natural gas for cooling and all that. One estimation is that 53% of fresh water usage was all in 2005 was all due to these thermal electrical power plants and energy usages. Large energy projects also displace millions of people. They destroy ecosystems and natural resources, and also they fuel climate change. What is important here is OECD's projections say that by 2050, world economy will be 4 times larger. And as in 2024, this is a bit older one, 2024, I believe the world economy will be about 5 times larger by 2050 compared to what it is now. So it may require about double the energy what we require now. Now, what I want to emphasize is we already have huge problems in meeting the energy demand, and also the consequences of so much of energy being consumed or produced. Now, imagine if this energy demand goes up by 2 times, how sorts of problems we'll have. So that's what we need to worry about. GHG emissions will increase. Terrestrial biodiversity is also projected to be decreased strongly. Then forest areas are going to be shrunk by about 13 to 14%. Air pollution is already a serious issue. Now, impact of electricity and energy, or the electricity and energy sector as a whole. We have said all these things. 70% of annual GHG emissions are also with fossil fuels. 25% of annual GHG emissions coming from electric power stations alone. Growing number of electricity appliances, potential for huge increase in demand. So the projection is by 2050, 60 to 75% of energy use likely to be only through electricity. And electricity itself is a great contributor of GHG emissions. For how fossil fuel subsidies and climate are impacting. There is a huge amount of fossil fuel subsidies all around the world. And as we have noted earlier, fossil fuels are the worst contributors to climate change. The question here is, what can we do? In developing countries, the majority of the benefits from fossil fuel subsidies go to the richest or the 20% alone. Now, 2/3 of all fossil fuel reserves will need to be stay unburned or underground if dangerous warming is to be avoided. This is the unanimity of scientific opinion. What it means is about 66% of what we are left with fossil fuels, they should not be burned or tapped. But can we do that? Now, if you look at the electricity scenario in India, see, this should be a very clear indication of what's happening global also. Of course, this growth in developed countries may not be as high. In India alone, between 1947 and 2024, total installed capacity grown up by 450 times. Okay, and between 1992 and 2024, national per capita electricity production has increased from 280 kilowatt hours per person per year to 1,395, which is around 5 times. And in case of India and many of these developing countries, this is likely to go up hugely in the next 15, 20 years. So the question here is, how are we going to meet them? About 5% of the households have no electricity even today. Many villages remain unelectrified. So the question here is, how are we going to manage the industrial civilization while maintaining the true planetary health? This is one, this seems to be, please don't overawed by the lot of information here. What I have done here is, I have tried to use an Excel spreadsheet to project how much time it will require in years for an economy to get doubled. For example, at 4% growth per year, an economy can get doubled in 19 years. Okay, 4%, 5, 6. The issue here is, if the economy grows at 10%, it will take only about 9 years to double. Let us understand what are the implications of doubling of economy. Well, most people and economists may jump with glee that, oh, double the economy, there will be affluence. No, doubling the economy should mean doubling of usage of resources, doubling of the pressure on land, water, and other minerals, almost doubling double or triple of the pollution, contamination of air, water, and soil, noise. There will be huge pressure on land degradation, forest degradation, diversion of water resources, the demand for highways, airports, motor vehicles, and all of them combined together can only lead to the worsening of global warming gases and the impact on the natural resources. So, a serious discussion is required at the global stage on the high GDP growth rate paradigm being advocated by most of the economists around the world. The Especially the developing countries, they are still enamored uh, with the idea of having huge economic growth. For example, China was supposed to have recorded around 9 to 10% for around 20 years between 1980 to 2000. Now they are having a lot of problems, ecological problems, which they are not able to solve that. India, unfortunately, is also going on the same path. From the last few years, it is recording 7 to 8 percentage. Even if it is at 7%, it will take only around 10 years for doubling of the economy. That means doubling of all the associated problems and threats in 10 years. So, some food for thought. China is fighting to contain the environmental fallout from 30 years of checked growth. Of 74 Chinese cities monitored by the central government, 71 out of 74 failed to meet air quality standards. Now, 2011 world population reached 7 billion. It is supposed to go to 9 billion. How to meet the demand for water, food, land. Social cost of carbon is one indicator. That itself is a very serious issue. If all humanity lived like an average resident of Indonesia, only two-thirds of the planet's biocapacity would be used. And if everyone lived like an average Argentinian, humanity would demand more than half of an additional planet, that means 1.5 of Earth. And if everyone lived like an average resident of the USA, a total of 4 Earths would be required to regenerate humanity's annual demand. So this can pose a scary picture of what's happening. What can be done? The question here is preserve natural capital. This is, I want to highlight to my youngsters here in this audience. The sum total of the climate change, the global warming, and all the associated problem is the unanimous decision of the global scientific community that at the global level, the total demand for materials and energy should come down drastically as soon as possible so that the climate change won't run away beyond our control. So, as a consequence of that, how do we do that? Preserve natural capital and protect the biodiversity. Unfortunately, forests are disappearing fast. Food and water energy security is becoming a serious issue. Produce better by significantly reducing human demand for land, water, energy, and other natural resources. Consume very wisely. That means demand should come down considerably. We are wasting a lot of our resources, and there is a huge inequity between poor sections of the planet and affluent sections of the planet. Now, redirect financial flows, direct the financial flows that support conservation and sustainable ecosystem management. This is what the various COP meetings are talking about. The developing countries are asking for a lot of technological transfers and even supporting finances because there is a strong allegation against the developed world that they have utilized much of the atmospheric resources, and now they are also the reason for why climate change has reached. So because of that, the developing countries are asking for technical or financial help from the developed world to reduce their GHG emissions. But I personally of the view that every country, including African countries and Asian countries, there is a huge scope for them to reduce their carbon footprint without actually impacting the developmental process. There are so many developmental options which can be taken up. I am one of them who are strongly arguing in favor of changing our paradigm and also the our processes and systems to meet our basic needs. Okay, equitable resource governance. This is another important. There is a very huge inequity in the access to resources in our country, at least. I'm sure it's same thing with many of the Asian countries and Africa. Poor are not having enough access to them. There was a very impactful study by Sir Nicholas Stern of United Kingdom. It's called as Economics of Climate Change. I would urge you all of them to read that. Some of the issues are: India may suffer economic costs of about 20% of its future GDP if we continue with the climate change. But if we make an attempt, honest attempt to mitigate them now, which will cost only 1% of present GDP as compared to 20% of future GDP. See, this is the contrast we are talking about. This is true with all countries, especially with the developing countries. What they are going to incur as economic costs in 20, 30 years is a humongous as compared to what the cost of mitigation now and adapting to the climate change. This is what we are trying to say. The more delay in addressing the global warming, the higher cost of mitigation in future. I will show you some of the slides. That's talking. See, this is the planet. There is so much of population here. It's overflowing. Some of them are falling down. See, what 1800 it was 100 crores. Now 2000 is 700 crores. So in about 200 years, the world population has gone up by 7 times. This is very, very intimidating. This is not a imaginary one. This is a real picture. These are the giant machines used for various construction activities, mining activities, etc. Can you imagine? See, they are so much intimidating. Such huge machines require huge materials and energy to consume. See, the activities undertaken by these machines were being done by human beings a few decades ago. They were much more sustainable. Okay, they were taking more time, but they were also giving employment to a lot of people. Now, this machine alone can consume huge amount of energy. It can do the work in say 1/10 of the time, but it will put a lot of people off the job. See, this is the crucial problem sort of thing. This is an important graph. See, if we compare it from 1800 to now, all these things have gone up. The graph, population has gone up, GDP, global GDP is supposed to have gone up, loss of rainforests, methane harvest, water usage, species extinction, vehicle number of, paper production, ozone depletion, carbon dioxide level, temperature, and all of them are going up. So how can we say that it's sustainable? It's not sustainable. See, this is one important slide. I thought I would share it with you. This is a mine. We don't know what sort of mining. It doesn't appear to be a coal mine, some other material. See, there is population here. Now, what the most of the mines, especially the coal mines, where are they? They're all below thick forests once upon a time. Very thick forests. Now, in order to have so much of mining, we have pulled down all those forests. For this bare, see, you can't see much of greenery here. There was a lot of greenery here. Now that will impact water, that will impact the pollution level. So if we want to have more of energy, this is what I'm trying to say. We require such of more of mines like this, coal, uranium, other mines. So what happens to the population down there? Let us go to one social injustice sort of thing. Now, let's say some three basic larger parameters to drive home the point. What is the dollars required in cosmetics in the US is 8 billion per year. Okay. Now, this is the dollars needed for basic education for everyone in the planet. And that is much less than 6 billion would suffice. But people are spending $8 billion in cosmetics alone in the US. Now, dollars spent in ice creams in Europe is something like 11 billions per year. That is what is the dollar required for water and sanitation for everyone in the planet is only 9 billion. See the contrast here. We don't want to spend even 9 billion for water and sanitation, which is a fundamental need for our life, as compared to 11 billions being spent in ice creams. No, it's anybody's question how ice creams are important. Same thing. dollars spent on perfumes in Europe and US is estimated to be around 12 billion per year, and dollars needed for productive health for all women, 12 billion. So these are stark contrast of social injustice. What's happening? The impacts of electricity industry and global warming, and what can we do about that? See, in the electricity industry, is around 21% of annual GHG emissions are from power stations alone. So what is the object? What is the option? Minimize the number of large size power plants. About 42% of carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuel power stations like coal, gas, and lignite. So eliminate them as soon as possible, because the global community has already agreed, especially the scientific community. They say that the target is 2050, beyond which no fossil fuel stations should be operating. Now, these large dams also, we have huge number of dams around the world. This tropical deforestation produce around 20% of all carbon emissions, especially methane. They are all caused by the large dams. And they also destroy long-term carbon sinks. So decommission in Europe and USA, a lot of decommissioning of dams is happening. And so we must be able to look at decommissioning many of the dams which are not considered essential or inefficient. Additionally, power stations consume a lot of natural resources, land, water, fossil fuel, etc. They are displaced people. They lead to atmospheric and groundwater pollution. And even the transmission lines alone are responsible for that. This is one stark picture. So many cars. So when anybody would get say scary about that. This is happening all over the world with respect to all sorts of vehicles, all sorts of materials, large shopping complexes. See, this is a picture of how fishes have been killed in the very large numbers because of pollution of water. See, this is a pipe water line. All the vehicles, thousands of vehicles, people have found them unusable. They have dumped it here. See, this is very important. It's like chewing more than what we putting food in the mouth more than what we can chew. Very heavy. We have become very greedy. We want to plunder the forest. So these are the very thick forest logs, timber logs. Now, in recent decades, we have gone to heavy machination of agriculture. Can you imagine? There are so many harvesting machines here. And this could have been done by human beings. It is being done all these hundreds of years. We have thrown those people out of job. We are using these motors, burning lot of fossil fuels and leading to global population. This is a very funny picture. This child is asking, how come you are rich and I am poor? And this boy says, my mom and dad have highly paid jobs working on that very problem. Interesting. This is an increasing incidence happening all over the world. These pests or myths, they are increasing in number in many parts of the world. They are threatening the agricultural products. It's happened recently in USA, China, and India also. So now let's come to green economy. I don't know how much time.
I think we are almost there. We'll have to take maybe 2 minutes or so to wind up.
Okay. Now let's look at the green economy. When you say green economy, what we mean to say is, how are we going to continue to meet our needs in order to keep the global warming under check. Minimum usage of materials and energy, as I said, this is very important. I want to highlight this to my young friends in the audience. We have to minimize at the global level the demand for materials and energy. Nobody will tell anybody how to do it, but we have to do that. I was talking that my electricity consumption is one of the lowest in the world for my social and economic status. I don't have a fridge, I don't have a washing machine, I don't have a vehicle. I'm trying to leading a simple life. It is possible if you make some sort of conscious decision in that. Not that everybody can afford not to have a vehicle. There, some people may need it. Some people may need air conditioner also. But are we looking in the correct direction? Then we have to use large, mostly renewable energy. We have to worry about eco-friendly buildings, clean transportation, and minimize the transportation wherever possible. Sustainable water usage, healthy water sources, minimize wastage of all sorts of wastage have to be reduced. 100% recycling of waste, responsible land use, equitable access to natural wealth. So one example is India needs about 7 million tons of timber for paper and pulp industry as of now, around 7 million tons. Now, if we decide to grow the same in our wastelands, we can give employment to 1 million people. We can produce enough energy from methane, wood, gas, biogas from these trees. We can produce transport fuel from these organic crops. We can also produce enough degradable plastic from. So why can't we look at that? The solution, the global scientists are of the view that the solution for global warming is lying in ecological solutions, not engineering or technical solutions like carbon sequestration and all that. We can prevent pollution of water, land, and because of that growing trees on wastelands. We can improve water resources. We can ensure food security. See, this is an example of an elephant being killed in a train. What's happening is we are building roads, railway lines, and even power lines across thick ecologically sensitive zones which were meant for animals. We are killing them, we are destroying them. So this is another example. We have built a road where it was a hatching ground for crabs. See what's happening. The question here is, can we contain global warming? It is. We can do that. India has huge potential for renewable energy, especially distributed renewable energy like housetop. I have a rooftop solar energy. I don't buy any electricity from the grid. I'm giving them more electricity than I'm consuming. I'm exporting around 5 times more electricity from the grid to the grid than what I'm importing. So sources of distributed energy, which is becoming the future. I strongly urge everybody in the audience, including students, to look at these options: solar rooftop, hybrid fuels, electric vehicles, combination of them. Most importantly, look at reducing the energy requirement. There is enough for everyone's need, not for someone else's greed. Let us manage the natural resources responsibly. An appeal to these participants, especially my young friends here. Please deliberate on all these associated colleagues, students, seniors, civil society groups. Consider joining the environmental protection activities. Consider pursuing all the education institutions in university. Then initiate such workshops and debates on distributed energy systems. Participate in all the association discussions, deliberations, policy making at the state level, national level, in order to herald a new power sector. It is very important. We can't leave all the decisions to a handful of people sitting in national capitals. We have to worry about it. Thank you very much. What I would like to end this conversation is basically I'm addressing my young students out there. Let us consider this interaction between me and you as a lifelong interaction. Please do not hesitate to interact with me on any of the associated issues. Arun Kumar can give you my contact telephone number. I have given my email ID. Please shoot any questions on these issues which is unclear. I'll be very happy to try and my best to answer. I wish there will be more of such discussions. Please do not hesitate to ask such questions with your staff members and also with me anytime you need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that very overwhelming presentation. There's so much of data that really scares us also. But how do we know that without a data, without a study, without a survey, we don't really know what really is causing? So I think this is very handy for all of us to work around it. But I just wanted to. I was also having a discussion with you yesterday. I don't know how to believe these data, but of course these are quite credible because we can see the disruptions more than that has been projected. Because the suspicion comes only when there are agencies like profit-making agencies, they would suppress data and findings. So if you have any like one or two line response to the authenticity of data and suppression of these findings, since you are coming from a research background and you deal with a lot of research.
Hello.
Hello? Sir, are
Hello. Sorry,
you?
Aruna. There is some
Ah,
internet disconnection. I can hear you all
okay,
right. I can see you.
okay. No, I was just asking you yesterday also that we always have there is always a debate about authenticity of data and findings. This because there are agencies who deal with this profit, so they try to suppress and manipulate. But you have any few comments on that?
Yeah. I don't think there should be any room for such skepticism. You go
Yeah.
to IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they have a lot of data on that. That should be fairly acceptable. I have no reason why it should be questioned. You may know IPCC is actually a global scientific body where it has representation from every country, about 2,000 scientists, engineers, and government policy makers, activists come together frequently and discuss on all the associated issues. And they base their discussions on the published papers, theory, research papers from various parts of the world, from all over. So that is completely acceptable, that we should wait for, accept that. And there are also United Nations Environment Program, World Health Organizations, the World Bank, and all that. They give very fairly accurate data. I don't think we cannot challenge that. We should not challenge, especially on what contributing to the issues in the global warming, climate change. Absolutely, I have no doubt about that.
Okay, thank you, sir. So now, if any questions are from students, please come up. And we have about 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, I think. Anyone?
Do they have option to talk to you directly?
They can also put messages in the message box, or they can just unmute and ask questions.
They may have.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi, Ellie. Please, can you unmute? Yeah.
I can't hear you. Hear
Oh,
that
she's
student.
trying
I
to.
think I think just coordinating. Like there's a few people in the same room, so I think some people need to be on mute.
but
Okay.
don't. Yeah, turn off.
Thank you. We are fighting against the feedback loops. Okay, I think it works. Thank you for your talk. I'm interested in, like, you talked about like sustainable growth, and I'm curious if you think that societal and just economic growth is even possible, and then why? Like in light of like the sadly effective fight of global capital, like disrupting like any legislation at the moment, and like the short time span we have because of like tipping points and stuff. So that would be interesting.
No, I can't see why it is not possible. The question here is, are we making necessary efforts? Are we fully committed towards such a society? I don't think it is visible there, at least at the high level, at the government level, all over the world. You're talking about legislation. Legislation is coming out of people's thinking, people's efforts. If people come together to prepare certain legislation moving towards that sustainable growth, why not? The legislations are meant for people, everybody. But are we really seeing the welfare of all sections of society from any legislation anywhere in the world? Most of the time, the legislations are misused. misappropriated for the benefit of few sections of the society. So I don't think what I suggest my young friends is, let's go back to say 150 years, how various societies around the world, they were all much more equitable. The most justice was there, at least in those countries where tyrannical administration was not there. People had access to nature. Their requirement and demand from the society was very minimal. For example, your ancestors, my ancestors, who were all living very close to the forests, say in 1800 and earlier to that, they had access to the forests. They had access to a good amount of water, fresh water, and forests were producing all they were looking for. They were sustainable in their own community. They were not looking for skyscrapers. They were not looking for 24-hour shopping mall. They were not looking to fly. So their life was much more sustainable. See, even there, though there was an absence of legislation at that time, the so-called legislation from our day perspective, they were much more comfortable. The poverty, they were not very affluent as many sections of today, but most of them were had the basic necessities to be met, and if they work hard, they were becoming rich. So I don't think there should be any difficulty. The difficulty here is not enough people from the global society are participating in such policy making. We are leaving all these policy making, decision making, project planning, economic decisions and all that to a handful of people sitting in capitals. If we all participate in such decision making, if we make our points very well known to the leaders or legislators, lawmakers, and government through various forums, I think still it is possible. And I would also like to very firmly say that it is possible only through such participation. No other legislation can really help. See, you can see there are many countries who have better legislation. For example, we have heard that New Zealand, Finland, Norway, Sweden, they're supposed to have much better quality of life. But have they been able to avoid the climate change implications fully? I don't think so. Because this climate change is an issue which affects everybody. So everybody has to contribute.
Thank you. So, any other questions? Or?
Arun, I had sent 2 files yesterday, 2 Word files, discussion papers. I suggest that you please make those 2 papers and my power policy the PDF version to all the students and also the other faculty members. If they are interested, they can go through that, because that gives much more detailed discussion on some of the issues which I raised today.
Sure, I will.
Yeah, maybe I'll just ask a follow-up from Ellie's question, because and Ellie, please correct me if I misinterpreted, but I felt like your question was pointing in the direction of what we call greenwashing, which is like a pretty common strategy, I would say, in the Western world to narrate this kind of utopian scenario where we continue to have this economic growth as economic growth as an engine, whilst developing these miraculous new technologies and continuing the sort of regime of profit, private property, etc. And so this is what we're kind of calling greenwashing, and it's actually quite in our fields very often of art and design and architecture, it's very much sort of involved in, it can be sort of uncritically involved in this. So I feel like that needs to be addressed too, right? Because we can't just sort of get through these energy demands, say the transition to I don't know, electric cars, for instance. Well, the metabolic reality of that is that this is incredibly water expensive for water to create such batteries. It's an extractive process, so there's nothing that can take us out of the finitude of resources at some point, even if the emissions may be less. So perhaps you could speak about like someone that has such rich knowledge as you, what are the balances you're striking between, let's say, government tendencies to keep on and carry on as normal, and narrating this through a greenwashing sort of strategy versus like actually, you know, generative, healthy sort of decisions that could be playing out. Because I think we're, at least in the West, we're quite we're getting a little cynical about this greenwashing, I must say.
No, you have made a very valid point. But unfortunately, this greenwashing is happening all over the world. Please don't think that it's happening only in the West. It's happening in India. I will give you an example. See, India is making a lot of tall claims that it's on renewable energy. Okay. Now, whereas the renewable energy sources has increased considerably during last 10, 15 years in India, but the addition to coal and nuclear power plants and dam-based power plants has not come down considerably. It has not even come down. Okay, second thing, when you talk about greenwashing, see, I am an electrical engineer and worked with a lot of issues. There is very serious issue with very large scale solar parks, power parks. They are not sustainable in the long run. So we must go to small size distributed energy resources like rooftop solar, rooftop wind turbines, community based energy, biomass units and all of that. Coming the fundamental issue in all these issues, whether it is an even I agree with you that electric vehicle will not solve the problem. We have to reduce the very need for so many vehicles. My question is, why do 25% of the population of the planet move from one part of the planet to another part of the planet every year? Why should we move so many people? Did our ancestors do that? Not necessarily. So that is a problem. Inside the bracket of greenwashing, we can also put sustainable airways, sustainable vehicles. There is nothing sustainable transportation and all that. The transportation can become sustainable only when we walk from point A to point B or do cycling sort of thing. The electric vehicles cannot be sustainable from that point. I agree with you. The batteries required for electric vehicle are a serious environmental pollution related issue and resource mobilization issue. It's a very serious issue. It is not going to sustain. So that's what I said. I don't have a vehicle at all. I move around in public vehicles where it is needed. I walk to the shops and all of that. That's why I emphasize to my youngsters in the audience that we should make all efforts possible honestly to minimize our demand for materials and energy, all sorts of materials. So that is where we have to do that. So I agree with you that there is a lot of greenwashing happening all over the world. That is what capitalists, that's all vested interests and industrial businesses do. But we have to work individually. Everybody has to contribute to the policy making discussion. I hardly see any debate on these issues. Only a few environmental groups, they go to COP meeting, they make huge, for example, the organization like Greenpeace, Earth Worldwide Fund, very handful of organizations can do that. But compared to a population of 7 billion in the world, if a few thousand people talk about that, who will listen to them? That's the problem. Everybody has to take participation, and each of us have to practice what we are preaching. By saying so, I mean we must bring down our demand to the minimum. Simple lifestyle is possible. At least it is certainly possible in tropical countries. I don't know, in Arctic countries, it may not be possible to minimize our energy demand. But we can reduce our energy demand by traveling. Air traveling, is it necessary for everybody? Air traveling is going through roof. In India alone, the last 10 years, the number of airports have doubled, more than doubled. Why should anybody travel every day? I have stopped traveling to Delhi and Bombay, even for such seminars. I used to do it once upon a time when things became busy. Now we have these facilities like webinars and all that. We can make use of that. We can reduce the transportation. That's one simple example.
So thank you. And we have two more questions, and we have about 5 minutes to wind up this session for the first session. Arjun, can you unmute yourself and ask?
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
I was wondering if you have a solution to make the mining for batteries in the case of electric vehicles more sustainable and less energy consuming. I mean, now you have these things called solid state batteries, but that's a different topic altogether. And also, what is your opinion on hydrogen being a possible future propulsion system? Like, is it
Uh,
viable according to you from an economic,
th-
like,
Thanks for
from
that question. There are, see, let us understand any type of energy we need, they cannot be sustainable unless it comes from nature. For example, wind and sun, solar, or water flow. Those three are the basic ones. Anything else, we are deriving it from the nature in a secondary and tertiary process. For example, any material required for making battery for EV, it has to come from mining. Mining has a very serious issue. The lithium and sort of thing, cobalt and all that, they are being largely sourced from a country like Congo in Africa. They are having very serious problem. So when you start taking out these minerals from the earth's surface, problem starts. There cannot be sustainable because we very soon we run out. So my opinion, we should focus on reducing the number of vehicles, which is absolutely needed, and then see how it can be made use of recycling of batteries, recycling of materials use. Of course, a lot of R&D is going on as to where we can get sustainable energy battery without harming the environment. I personally believe it is not possible to have any number of batteries going on for next few decades or 100 years without harming the environment. There is another question you asked. What was that?
yeah,
Hydrogen.
hydrogen, whether you see
Hydrogen,
it
yes.
as a viable
Okay.
alternative
Hydrogen, as you
to
know,
fossil
hydrogen
fuels.
is in the atmosphere. We have to pull it out. That basically the present technology is to use water, split it into oxygen and hydrogen. But remember, that itself requires huge amount of energy. Splitting of water into hydrogen and oxygen, collecting hydrogen from that, collecting, sourcing, transporting, that requires a lot of energy itself. So there are many scientific communities, scientific groups who think this hydrogen cannot be sustainable at all if we do in the present technology. For example, if there is a source, if there is a technology where only water from the ocean can be directly converted into hydrogen using daytime sun energy, maybe that's suitable, maybe that's sustainable. But the present one is we are using fossil fuels to energize those processes, converting water into hydrogen. That is not sustainable. So we have to look at, my suggestion to youngsters here is, whenever any of these technologies are advocated by some sort of the society, let us look at the entire life cycle of that process. The material, the conversion, the wastage, how do we manage the wastage, what is the energy required for the process, how do we store, what happens to that in future, is it sustainable? We have to look at each step of that process, then it becomes self-evident whether it is sustainable or not.
So last question from Emilia. Can you unmute yourself, Emilia?
I'm here. Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. I wanted to ask your opinion on the matter of, I've had conversation with friends talking about why should I make small differences in my life. You spoke about not having a washing machine and not having a car, when those sorts of decisions to be sustainable are incomparable to like a singular commercial flight using jet fuel. And I wanted to ask how you reconcile those ideas of making small changes in your own personal life, where we need kind of systematic change on a larger scale for it to be truly impactful.
Then I would like to draw your attention, young lady, that these small issues at individual levels are coming together to make the large problem. Is it not so? My own electricity consumption is contributing to the energy demand of the local distribution network, which is putting its demand on the regional network, which is putting demand on its national grid. And these sources which require electricity to be produced, they will have an impact on the global scenario. So my own electricity consumption or material consumption has an indirect benefit impact on the global scenario. Same thing, if I decide not to fly frequently, if I decide to avoid air travel and travel by much more sustainable transportation options like electric cars or electric trains, that the global demand on the transportation related pollution will come down. So my approach would be like this: unless I start making myself a sustainable lifestyle, how can I expect my legislators or rule makers or people around me in the society to become sustainable? So it has to start at our individual level. That's what I want to say. We may say that the savings what we may achieve is very small compared to the global scale, but only these small scale savings will alone go towards global contribution. Is it not so? Did I answer
Thank you.
your question satisfactorily, or do you want any further discussion on that?
Well, I think my last question would be about the fact that, sorry, I'm hearing double
Somebody is
audio.
asking you to end it. Okay.
Like we're in a climate crisis. We've had like other seminars talking about this notion of like a poly crisis of all these things happening at the same time. Is it too late to make these small changes in your own life to then hope to affect your community, to then hope to affect your country, to then hope to affect society? Like, do we still have time for that to happen?
There is time, but that window of time is fast closing. We have to do that quickly, because as I said again, unless I am convinced about the possibility of reducing my own needs, how can I expect the global demand to come down? It can't, is it not? And unless I start doing that, I cannot talk to my legislators, lawmakers, or friends or family to reduce their needs. Unless I do that, unless I am convinced about my individual level that such a thing is possible, I can't expect such a thing to happen at the global level. As simple as that.
Okay, thank you, sir. I think we have come to this last minute of this. So we will take a 15 minutes of break, and then Patricia will join us for her presentation at 15 minutes from now. That would be India time. It's 4:10. No, 4:15. 4:14 actually. It is too late. Yeah, and sir, if you want to hang around and join us on the second session with Patricia's talk, which is very much, the similar area. Like she talks about the area or so we'll come back and we break.
Sir, I think it would be 4:05 for India time.
4:05, is it?
15, yes, 15 minutes from now.
Okay, 4:05.
And-
Okay. Okay.
Right.
Give it
Thank you
4:05.
so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. See you in a minute.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Mr. Sharma.
Thank you. Ms.
Yes.
Patricia said in a minute, but you are talking about 15 minutes.
No.
We are
I
taking
was-
15 minutes.
I meant
Okay,
it as
okay.
a
That's good.
as an idiom.
Because I'm
Yeah.
here. 1
You-
minute is over. I'm ready
you-
now.
See you shortly. I'm hoping, I mean, I don't know what your schedule is like, but there's some resonance and also some small friction. So it'll be very interesting to
Oh, it has to happen. After all, we are human beings.
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
different yeah. That's fine. That's most,
great.
as long as we are ready to listen to each other and learn from each other,
Absolutely.
should be fine. Should be fine.
100%. Yeah. So we'll see you in 14 minutes. I'll be precise now.
Yeah,
How about that?
I'll be back in 14 minutes. Thank you.
Okay,
Bye.
sir.
ಅರುಣ ಇದನ್ನ ಹೀಗೆ ಇಟ್ಟಿಲ್ಲ, ನೀವು ಕಾಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ when you are ready?
So yes, let it be.
ನನ್ನ ಲ್ಯಾಪ್ಟಾಪ್ ನಲ್ಲಿ ಇರ್ತೀನಿ. I will be doing something else. I will not move out of my position.
Just
You can
about
you can just call me
20.
when you are ready. Okay.
Sure. Okay, sir. Okay, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Can you hear me, Aruna?
Yes, sir.
ಅವ್ರೆಲ್ಲ 15 ನಿಮಿಷ ತಗೋತಾರ.
ಇನ್ನೊಂದು 5 ನಿಮಿಷಕ್ಕೆ ಬರ್ತಾರೆ ಸರ್ ಎಲ್ಲ. ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್
ಇನ್ನು
ಆಯ್ತು. 10 ನಿಮಿಷ ಆಯ್ತು.
4 ಗಂಟೆ ಆಗಿಲ್ಲ.
ಅಲ್ಲ 4:05ಕ್ಕೆ.
ಓಕೆ ಸರಿ.
4:05ಕ್ಕೆ.
ಇವಾಗ ಏನು ವಾಟ್ ಇಸ್ ಯುವರ್ ಫೀಡ್ಬ್ಯಾಕ್? ವಾಸ್ ಇಟ್ ಓಕೆ? ವಾಸ್ ಐ ಆಡಿಬಲ್?
Yes, sir.
ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತೆ? ತುಂಬಾ ನಿಧಾನ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ನ, ಫಾಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ನ?
ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಟೈಮಿಗೆ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಮ್ಯಾನೇಜ್ ಆಯ್ತು. ನಮ್ದು ಇಷ್ಟೇ ಟೈಮ್ ಇರೋದು, ಅಂದ್ರೆ 3:45 ನಾವು ಎಲ್ಲ ಮುಗಿಸ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು 15 ನಿಮಿಷ ಬ್ರೇಕು. ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಯ್ತು, ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಾಯ್ತು. ಸೊ ಐ ಮೀನ್ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ವೆರಿ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಏರಿಯಾ.
Do you think it came across effectively?
Yes, it came across very effectively.
It's a very vast topic, Aruna. I was always concerned how to make it very logical, correct logical ತಗೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕು ಈ ಹುಡುಗರಿಗೆ, ಯಂಗ್ಸ್ಟರ್ಸ್ ಅವ್ರು. ಈಗ ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಹತ್ರ ಪೆಟ್ರಿಷಿಯಾ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಹೇಳೋದು ತುಂಬಾ ಸುಲಭ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ, ಬಿಕಾಸ್ ದೇ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಆಲ್ರೆಡಿ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೀರಿಯನ್ಸ್ಡ್. ಈ ಹುಡುಗರಿಗೆ ಹೇಳುವಾಗ ಪಾಪ ದೇ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಬೀನ್ ಇನ್ ಎ ಡಿಫ್ರೆಂಟ್ ವರ್ಲ್ಡ್ ಆಲ್ ಟುಗೆದರ್. ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬರೋದು ಹೇಗೆ ಅಂತ ಲಾಜಿಕಲಿ ಕರ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋದಾಗ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ನಾವು ಹೇಳಿದ ಕೆಲವು ಐ ಡೋಂಟ್ ನೋ ಹೌ ಮಚ್ ವಾಟ್ ಐ ಸೆಡ್ ವಾಸ್ ರಿಯಲಿ ಪ್ಯಾಲೆಟಬಲ್ ಅದು ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ.
ಸರಿ ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಾಗಿತ್ತು. ಅದೇ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಟೈಮ್ ಕನ್ಸ್ಟ್ರೇಂಟ್ ಅಷ್ಟೇ, ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಇನ್ನು
ತುಂಬಾ ಕೊಡಕ್ಕೂ ಆಗಲ್ಲ, ಹುಡುಗ ಬೇಜಾರಾಗುತ್ತೆ. ನೀವ್ ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೋದು, ಯು ಕ್ಯಾನ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಸಚ್ ಇಂಟರಾಕ್ಷನ್ಸ್ as often as possible. I don't mind coming back to you with such talk discussions every month. ಯಾವ ತರ ನೋಡಿ convenient. There may be some specific issues also. There are specific issues, how to reduce our air travel or how to make power stations more efficient. Can we do with nuclear power, or nuclear power is really required? There is some new fancy for small modular reactors, SMRs.
Yes.
Okay. That will be much easier for me to talk on those specific issues because I have been working on them.
Right.
It's always not easy to talk on such larger issues because it takes more time. You have to go logically, and the time constraint is always there.
Yes.
Yeah, and you have to keep the attention of the students alive. That's also an issue. Maybe you're all teachers, so you know how to do that.
No, I'm basically a practitioner. So now I'm just learning to
teach.
Yes.
Yeah. I have gone to a number of engineering colleges for lectures since I came from Australia. I think I might have done around 10-12 lectures so far. They all seem to be happy with that, but I'm not sure whether it could be improving to a considerable extent.
ಇವ್ರದ್ದು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿರುತ್ತೆ ಕೇಳಿ, ಪ್ಯಾಟ್ರಿಷಿಯಾ ಅವ್ರದ್ದು ಈಗ ಸಬ್ಜೆಕ್ಟ್. So her topic is where is the site in atmospheric conditions. It's very interesting subject, and I'm particularly very much interested in it. So for you also it is, I think it would be very interesting.
How will you come to know whether everybody is there or not?
Another 2-3 minutes. 2 minutes. Yes.
When they come, everybody come, they give a sort of presentation. I am here, something like that. No.
No. We get used to the camera off.
Yeah. That was one of the frequent complaints about the students when they during COVID, many universities and institutions, they went offline or rather online courses. The students used to keep the camera ready, but they used to go out and do all sorts of things. So teachers were struggling.
I mean, some of it was for bandwidth reasons. So it's also, when you talk about energy,
Correct.
There you go.
My own laptop, my own system here was indicating to me that the bandwidth is not good enough. I was getting that message on my laptop just now. Yeah, it can happen. So what's your specialization, Patricia?
I have an arts background, but I've kind of moved more into philosophy and theory. And with a big focus on the planetary turn. So I'll talk a little bit about that today. And have worked quite interdisciplinarily with social studies of technology. So a lot of my philosophical work is sort of the interface of, let's say, feminist epistemologies, philosophies of computation, philosophies of technology, but kind of always with this orientation of like, what do we mean by a planetary recognition? So yeah, but I'll talk a little bit about that today.
Do you live in Canada or do you live in Holland?
No, I live neither. I'm from Canada, so I'm actually visiting my mom at the moment
Okay.
on the east side, and I live in Berlin since
Okay.
more than 20 years. But this job is in the Netherlands, so it's I take the train, the electric train. I don't fly.
But you can't take electric train from Germany to Canada. You have to fly.
This I had to fly. Yes, my swimming was not up to speed, I'm afraid. So I
Swimming, you're very adventurous
Yes.
even to think of swimming from
No,
Atlantic across.
I also respect the Atlantic, you know. I I do not trust myself.
So what is the scenario in Germany? I'm very much interested to know more about Germany because for the last 10, 15 years, I'm following the energy transition scenario in Germany. How they are doing very well. I thought I was told that they have done very, very well. They are very adventurous in shutting down their nuclear power plants and all of that. How is it now?
Yeah, but that's not so innocent. I mean, I'll give you the German answer, which would be Jein, which is a combination of Ja and Nein, and I think you can understand what it means.
Okay.
Yeah, it's certainly there's more consciousness than in Canada, for instance, because of course we still look out onto vast wilderness in Canada, and so it hasn't really been, and it's a very energy-rich country. Germany has like nothing, right? It needs to import, so it's a very interesting to kind of be familiar with these two cultural scenarios and geographic differences because they are immense, and the Canadians are quite
yes.
like one of the more, you know, they never appear on that list that you said, you know, the US, Indonesia, Russia, but, you know, per capita, Canadians are up there with Qatar for carbon footprint, higher than Americans. So it's just that we're a small population, so we don't register at a statistical level, but per capita.
Canada is very fortunate to have a huge land area, lot of resources, small population. So that's not a typical case for us to consider. We are worried about
the exact opposite. Yeah,
those countries which is constrained resources and all of that. Yes, but I appreciate Germany basically because they took in a very adventurous position to stay that we will shut down nuclear power plants. Not many now, no other country has done that.
So
well, that's another debate, but we should get started, I think, for the session.
Can we start? Are we all ready?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Okay. So straight away, welcome back, everyone. The second speaker is Patricia Reed. We know her very well so far because she has been the driving force behind this forum, that is atmospheric entanglement. And she's been the project initiator and co-programmer of at Department of Critical Inquiry Lab, Design Academy in Eindhoven. And besides that, Patricia is a theorist, an artist and designer based in Berlin. I mean, she has done a number of things. Her interdisciplinary research activities, often in collaboration with, in collaboration, examine the planetary turn in cosmological register, with particular focus on techno-feminist and artifactual epistemologies, as well as the interplay of models and practices of inhabitation. So this is just very brief. I'm sure all of you must have read about Patricia. There is a list of bibliography there. And today she is talking about this subject, very interesting subject. It's called "Where is the Site in Atmospheric Conditions?" It is, I mean, for me, it's very interesting one. So I welcome Patricia to speak.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's great to great to be here very early. First, I must apologize. I would never normally program myself into a pedagogical framework that co-initiated. But we did have some last minute illness, cancellation, etc. So I'm afraid you're stuck with me for a few minutes this afternoon or this morning or this evening, depending on where you are. But yeah, just to give a bit of a background, like I said, coming from a fine arts background, not finance, fine arts, moving into theory and also working in design and in my independent practice, because I think just as your professors at Jindal, they're all professional practitioners in their own right? We're not just working in education. Okay, thanks, Amelia. Yeah, and actually I thought I loaded up a couple of slides just based on Shankar Sharma's presentation to maybe set a different tone, and then I'll show those quickly just to be a bit spontaneous. And hang on one sec, I need to share the screen. Allez, so I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Here we go. Allez, this one. Okay, share this one. So now it should be full screen. Is that correct? No.
Not yet. Not yet.
There we go. Now?
Yes.
Okay. So yes. So a few things. So on the question of even despite the cynicism, I think this image is very interesting to me. It's often shown as a kind of iconic image of what policy can do, right? Because we're often in a very gloomy scenario, and a lot of us, or there's a lot of doubt of like if things can be done at a policy level. And at least this image shows that yes, policy makes a difference. So for those of you who are old enough to remember the big debates of the 80s, 90s, was like the ozone crisis, for example, right? We had a massive hole over the ozone, and due to CFC reduction, policy changes at a global level, we have indeed, it seems to be repairing this thing. So this is an image that is supposed to denote a level of optimism to say that when there are collective efforts, some degree of change can manifest. I was also struck by, these questions that we got, right? Where we're measuring, let's say, or this tendency to kind of measure growth or betterment in terms of GDP, right? And of course, that metric is also being questioned at the moment, especially when it comes to, let's say, these weird measurements of like, what is the happiest place to live and so on. Like, we know it can't be reduced to GDP alone. But I think this points to a much more fundamental question at the heart of what we're experiencing now, with this sort of like brutal intrusion of the planetary upon our recognition, and that is like a cosmological orientation. And I found this definition quite helpful. So I thought I would just share with you, because it's actually from a book that is related to international relations, for example. So it's not an esoteric or particularly spiritual predilection here, but when we're talking about a sort of cosmological shift or a cosmological orientation, we're talking about the different ways that international orders, or indeed the population, is in general orienting themselves to reality. And so, very simple example, in medieval times, nations, or well, there was no nations, but let's say states, would have oriented their decision making based on the glory of God, for instance. And now, of course, all of these, or the predominant justification for decision is economic growth as a type of glory, right? And so I think this is a really helpful 5-part definition, or 5-part, let's say, composition of cosmology to keep in mind when we're talking about the stakes of this kind of transformation. So it's ontological, so what we think there is in a world. it's epistemological, what we know about what we think there is in a world. It's a particular orientation to temporality, so the nature and the direction of time itself. It's an orientation to cosmogony, both in terms of the birth of the universe, what we understand about it, like the Big Bang, or indeed the origin of our species and the sort of evolutionary trajectory of the species. And then finally, destiny, or the role and place of humanity in the cosmos. So of course, we already went what was spoken about, in the sort of with this Copernican turn. So the moment that this is a sort of lauded as a sort of big humiliation against the proposed centrality of humans at the center of the world, right? And of course, that just means that we moved from a geocentric model of the universe or the solar system to a heliocentric model of the universe. And what that does is that displaces human centrality. So subsequent what's been called, Copernican humiliations don't necessarily need to be about the actual Copernican moment, but they have been said to include, the theory of evolution, which takes also places humans at, just as any other species, right? We're susceptible to evolution, etc., right? And so you could say that, and one of the turns that we're experiencing in a lot of the students work with now is a sort of more than human paradigm, right? That, and especially coming from the field of design and art, which has been largely, human-centric, or designed objects are there to serve the needs of humans, right? It's very interesting now to kind of, what does it mean, or what is the impact upon our fields when we are relativizing ourselves, right? And not just as the central agent or the only actor in the universe, right? And so what I wanted to suggest, and sort of drawing from Shankar Sharma's presentation, was I think there was this sort of implicit, the word wasn't mentioned, but I think there's this implicit, condition of our moment to think metabolically. And I believe that was sort of referred to more in terms of, was it the life cycle of processes, was I think the term that was used earlier. And certainly you see this, right, when we think about the way we speak about production and economy, right? Perhaps you've heard the term negative externality, right? And that is, if you have a production process in mind, and you have a goal, right? So you achieve that goal, but then some byproducts are like unfortunate negative consequences of having produced or having undergone the processual activities to attain that goal of like a product or something like that. And so essentially, at a large scale, climate catastrophe is the biggest negative externality that we've ever experienced, right? So I'd just like to put those sorts of ideas on the table to also, give a little bit more, how would I say, historical or transformative orientation on some of what we saw Shankar Sharma talking today, because I happen to think that, if we are to, when we talk about, words like globalization, this is marking a very specific bracket of history, right? And so if we're now speaking about, we keep using this word, a planetary turn, etc. What does that actually mean? How is it different potentially from globalization? And what does it mean if we understand ourselves in this particular historical moment as a kind of juncture between different historical worlds, right? So, and then of course, we're let me just go to the beginning of the presentation here, because those were just stuff that I added, while we were in the midst of that talk. Lots of slides. We'll see how many we get through. Okay, so here we go. So those are basically, let's say, the background conditions that I wanted to raise today. And I thought, it may even be helpful to take this occasion to say, like, what is all the background considerations that even went into creating this sort of platform for collaboration and engagement, right? And the one thing that I think is important to mention is I think this is a deeply humbling moment, where a lot of our, not only in our personal or on an existential level, but also through the types of activities we engage with, right? Our practices as artists, designers. What does it mean to practice between these historical epochs, right? That basically are demanding of us that we have a different orientation to reality, to each other, to the stuff and the material of the world. And what does that mean for, at a more, those are like obviously very metaphysical questions, but then what does it mean at the level of practice, when we're humble artists or humble individuals going about our life? And the one thing that I wanted to raise today, because I think we've seen this a little bit in the practices that we've been exposed to through some of the artist talks, is, we talk a lot about field research, right? Or site specificity, site-based research, right? A lot of us are engaged or interested in those practices. And I think that if we are to take the consequences of a planetary turn very seriously, this has a deep impact on how we conceive of, what is a site? Where is it? Where is its boundary condition? And there's a very simple way to kind of illustrate that, is just to say, that what we do in Eindhoven or Sonipat doesn't stay in Sonipat or in Eindhoven, right? So what does it mean to be practicing with those in mind, practicing site specificity in mind? So yeah, and like I said, okay, so going between my own practice, just to give a little intro, I moved between theory, art, and design. So doing a lot of writing and so on. And the thing that, like I said, I think the thing that's very deeply humbling at this moment is how this is impacting, our field, right? So how are the practices of our fields in design, art, and architecture transformed by this shift from the global to planetary thought? And the other thing that I think was sort of, interesting to draw from Shankar Sharma's presentation, right, is how we mediate things like a planetary turn or climate catastrophe, right, which is often through graphs, through the dissemination of statistics and information, which is entirely necessary and important. But this is a type of knowledge about the planetary. And I think one thing that we need to be questioning is how that knowledge about something transforms into know-how or tacit knowledge or practices, how it impacts us to behave differently, right? And this may in fact be more than simply, doing these daily things of being, let's say, more modest in one's consumption and so on and so forth, but really demands a different orientation to reality. And I think that the arts and design have a really interesting role to play precisely on this role of mediation, again, which is it's not simply making work about this kind of planetary condition or about climate catastrophe, but it concerns how that knowledge radically transforms our relationship to each other, to reality, to the materials at hand, right? So it's like submitting one's practice to these types of conditions. So I thought it would be important to first of all say, okay, so what's the difference between the global and the planetary? And I think, there's obviously this could be a whole PhD, seminar sort of thing. But I think one important actor in this is like Deepak Chakrabarty, where he is parsing this through the lens of his discipline, which is history. He's a historian. So basically, it's to say that what the planetary kind of compels us, or what the difference is let's say a globalized theory of history is one where we narrate, where history is narrated by the domain of human events and the disputes that maybe historians have about the veracity of those events and who did what and when. But the point is, it's like it's completely extracted from geological or metabolic or atmospheric reality of the Earth. And what Chakrabarti is demanding of his field of history, and I think we can extrapolate this lesson for ourselves as well, is to say, you know, like we cannot like look at these or the planetary compels a kind of reintegration of human social economic activities upon a geological strata, right? As if we are to claim that some humans are agents of geological transformation, that means that history must be sort of reattached to that geological strata. And so he ends up with these kind of, 4 theses in this book here. We can just think about number 1, for example, that this anthropogenic explanations of climate change, and all anthropogenic means is like of human origins, spell the collapse of the humanist distinction between natural history and human history. So again, just to clarify certain terms, when he says the humanist distinction, he's talking about, he's not talking about humanity, or being kind to one another. He's talking about a very specific, let's say, European picture of the human as a man that arose in the Enlightenment period, where the human as a man, and it's indeed a man, is rationally masterful over his environment, can control, etc., etc. So the anthropogenic climate change basically says this distinction is no longer possible. Right. And I think one, just to kind of highlight here, I think it's important that what we're witnessing on a meta level with Chakrabarti is really this incorporation of this, let's say, data or knowledge that is largely derived from an Earth system science perspective. But he doesn't just leave it there as like, okay, that's happening there, and I'm going to continue doing my discipline of history as if, nothing's changed, or as if I'm in the same world. Rather, he looks at it how it radically unsettles all the stuff he learned as a historian, who was like a scholar in post-colonial, post-imperial methods, etc. So it recalled to me this important notion or warning, if you want, even from the scholar Lewis Gordon, where he's talking about disciplinary decadence, which is where we basically are only working to preserve the sort of self-narration of our field at the expense of like disavowing reality, right? And I think every field is susceptible to this, right? We work in codes, we have our languages and our jargon, our canons that support what we think the art field is or the design field is, rather than having certain frictions with reality and producing that deep questioning as to how this ought to transform the way that we legitimize our practice, the way that we understand its relevance in a contemporary setting, etc. So I think the Chakrabarti, the way that he allowed this, let's say, knowledge about climate catastrophe or the planetary to permeate his discipline as a historian, to engage in that feedback process, is a really interesting and important example of how these, let's say, outside disturbances deeply unsettle certain foundations of our fields. Yeah, so I thought like we can just talk quickly about this distinction between the global and planetary cosmology. So when I've been using this term, a planetary turn, like what exactly do I mean here? And specifically, not necessarily from an Earth science systems perspective, but like, from practices, basically. And so basically in this particular book, which was interesting because it's really concerning the planetary turn from a literary perspective, so from like an aesthetic or discursive perspective, not necessarily a scientific perspective. The authors kind of use this planetary turn as a way to counteract the homogenizing forces of globalization, right? Because you know, these globalizing forces have produced sort of massive structural inequities, radical social injustices, not to mention the fact that they have scaled to a point of affecting, you know, of producing a planetary recognition, but we actually have no legal governing body to you know, mitigate a planetary condition, right? And I think that's a really important topic unto itself, right? Like, what is planetary governance, and not in a register where we end up in this like totalitarian, you know, government of this massive scale, right? But like, how does governance itself need to be redesigned for a planetary condition? And so basically for these particular authors, which I think is helpful to think about, the planetary basically marks a perceptual shift from the globe as a financial technocratic system to the planet as a world ecology, right? So what does it mean to think ecologically? Which again, we can use, reintroduce those terms metabolically, etc. And the stakes are quite important, right? And the reason why I keep returning to this idea of a historical, you know, at the interstice of two historical worlds, is that this is actually a very unprecedented moment. As Sylvia Wynter noted, you know, as post-nuclear creatures, now facing this climate catastrophe, and we've also had other planetary events. The coronavirus was a planetary event, right? We're for the first time in human civilization as a species having to contend with an environment in common, no matter how uncommonly lived it is, right? So this is an unprecedented historical epoch, and the sort of, let's say, legacies of Euro modernization, which, you know, eases into economic globalization. The strategy to achieve that scale has been one of homogenization, right? If we just have one economy, one sort of metric of betterment, aka economic growth, then this is some sort of unifying force, which is obviously proving to be very highly destructive, both for the planet, but also for humans, non-humans alike. So those are the stakes of the situation. Is how do we learn to coexist in an environment in common, despite the fact that it is uncommonly lived, and we have very different degrees of accountability in this crisis, this like, historical accountability into this crisis. And what does it mean? You know, and I think this is actually a quite a sensual question in a way, right? Because when you think about that figure of the humanist man, that was Chakrabarty said, you know, we can no longer think of history purely in that term. That denotes a very specific spatial arrangement, right? You maybe recall the Vitruvian man with his outstretched arms and these kind of perfect proportions. But what the humanist figure does is also reduce the earth, reduce the planet to a very humanly phenomenological scale, which is a particular scalar bias that we're dealing with, and how that impacts the way that we sense the world, our engagement within it, etc. So we'll be coming back to that shortly. But I think, like, you know, there's obviously many disputes about what is the planetary, and there's many different angles. But I think it's like inextricably bound to sensing a commonality in the world, because our relations are interdependent. And by our, I don't even just mean amongst humans, right? It's like multi-species sort of considerations. And I think, again, this is really important to emphasize here, especially for practices and when you know, we're talking about how this ought to transform us, right? It's more than just an epistemological recognition. Yes, we needed to have this epistemological recognition to be able to witness this planetary interaction, this metabolic reality. But it's a mode of being in the world. So it's a modality of being describing both a phenomenological perception and a new theater of being whose novelty is becoming more conspicuous every day. So I find this quite interesting, right? Because as artists and designers, we are trafficking in the realm of senses, in the realms of mediation, in the realms of creating, you know, conditions of perception. So how can we be participating in these new conditions of sensing and our relationship with reality in order to be able to sense that type of, you know, multi-scalar coexistence, basically. So the thing that I wanted to, or what I found helpful to think through is to think, you know, we have all these graphs and statistics on the one hand, so very important. And for me, I tend to think about that as indexing the planetary, right? We can recognize it and we can know about something. But I find quite important here to introduce some of the legacies of feminist epistemologies, which we're always highlighting, talking about like practical knowledge, right? Not just speaking about something, but about know-how or tacit knowledge, which to me concerns the domain of inhabitation, right? Like we know how to go about and live and so on. And for this, like we can turn to, we can look at a distinction between, let's say, what Benjamin Bratton would talk about as the planetary, as this agglomeration of, let's say, techno-social economic systems that have produced this massively scaled condition, compared to planetarity, which is a notion introduced by Gatsby Spivak, which is more related to conditions of inhabitability, right? So practical know-how. And she introduces this some years ago. And of course, she's quite funny, quite a funny scholar as well. So I think this kind of sums it up very well, right? The globe is an abstraction. So she says, on our computers, we don't live there, right? Just as we don't live in graphs, right? We don't live in bar charts and what have you. So when we're using this notion of planetarity, I'm using it to refer to, let's say, the sets of consequences we import from recognizing the planetary, but how those get transformed into practices, into different modes of sensing, or if you prefer what Nicole was talking about, attunements and so on. And so basically we can have these types of recognitions, these epistemological recognitions, but they don't necessarily directly translate into what we should do, right? I mean, that question comes up at every sort of talk of this sort of nature. So the main sort of conclusion is to arrive at one to say that, you know, the planetary has yet to be worlded, right? So we have yet to constitute worlds which are different from the Earth, right? We have yet to constitute worlds that are premised on a planetary condition. So we may know a lot about the planetary, but we haven't yet translated that into or mediated that into new configurations of coexistence, and that takes place through practices. So yeah, so it's basically about it's about looking at some of the knowledge that we gain from this recognition, but about how that gets, you know, transformed. And I think we're at that very experimental space at the moment, which is why I also think there's a degree of, even though there's despair, obviously, I mean, we don't want to be naive about this, but I also think it's an incredibly experimental time to be thinking about the consequences of this knowledge upon practices, how it really reorientates your cosmological, you know, understanding of the world and our sets of entanglements with it. And I think the really important thing to say here is that because this planetary world does not yet exist, right? We can recognize a epistemological recognition, but we haven't yet adequately transformed our modes of coexistence. We're dealing with the problem of how to recognize or how to imagine worlds that don't yet concretely exist, right? So how do we become witnesses to these conditions that are not yet manifest, right? And I think this is incredibly rich territory for the arts and design to be working in, because we have a lot of tools that act as sort of like vehicles or mediums to address phenomena that is not yet fully real, right? Although it's not totally divorced from reality. But so I'm very interested in this kind of imaginative exercise, right? And I think that this ultimately, takes us to a post-critical mode of producing art or producing research-based design practices, because I think we're all sort of, or maybe aware that, merely pointing to how bad everything is or continually just sort of demonstrating the problem without working through ramifications, etc., is not really, I think we're beyond that at this point, which is to say that we're beyond a mode of creating mere awareness of these issues. We have to start working through them. And, even though there's these really, it sounds even naive if you're like somebody who's out there saying, oh, I believe in a better world, or I want to participate in the crafting of a better world. There's a really interesting and difficult philosophical question at the heart of that, because just like saying the planetary has yet to be worlded, a better world is actually a world that is not yet in existence. So a better world is, requires that we try to imagine what betterment and have disputes, because that's the core of politics, right? Disputes over what betterment means. And ultimately you're talking about an other world that does not yet concretely exist. And so the question that I find compelling for us as practitioners is to think about potentially our practices as vehicles or mediums that learn to witness a world that doesn't yet concretely exist, right? But that nonetheless we could possibly interact with in order to stimulate our imagination outside of the given conditions that we are sort of thrown into, basically. So all of that said, like, what does it mean to be at the interstice of these historical worlds, right? And one notion that I find very helpful from Denise Ferreira da Silva is to think of this, not as the end of, it's not at the end of the world, it's the end of a historical world, which means the end of a world as we've known it, right? And I think it's quite telling that a lot of the imaginaries coming from like Hollywood in the last decades were basically equating the end of a world with a kind of total doomsday scenario, right, etc. We all saw those dystopian films, which is more of I think, a psychological symptom of losing hegemony rather than seeing it as a sort of opportunity. Like, what does it mean what does an end of the world as we know it imply, right? It means we have to know it otherwise, or we have to approach it otherwise. So this is actually quite an opportunity, rather than these, beautiful AI-driven doomsday scenarios when we speak of an end of a world as we know it. And to me, this signals, like, when we're talking about the end of a world, we're also talking about a different types of commitments, right? And different types of value commitments, different, what we call, like, in philosophy, axiological commitments. And when we think about the operations of homogenization that were going on in globalization in terms of making, easy trade of commodities, et cetera, forcing basically the world's population into a Homo economicus model of being human, and evaluating quality of life based on these sorts of predilections. I always kind of come back to this ideal of that the making global of a world was actually this kind of desire to make the world very small and find comfort in that, right? And so I don't know, you know, the North American in me cannot ever shake that jingle of "It's a Small World After All" from Walt Disney. Certainly 1964 is really the cusp of, you know, global domestic air travel, et cetera, but the point being that as the world is becoming highly interconnected, you know, through television and through other media strategies, in those early days, the ideal behind it was to kind of make the world small and familiar, as if that would be, you know, appealing somehow, which I find deeply problematic, because it also is about forcing different populations into a regime of legibility or homogenization, in order to appeal to the small world ethos of a sort of Euro-modern legacy. So despite the fact that the scale of the global is usually thought of as very large, right? When we use the word global to denote a size, it's usually thought of as large, but I think the political movement of globalization is trying to make the world incredibly small, and that is very dangerous, because what that means is, like, when we're talking about homogenization, we're talking about the lack of diversity. So this concretely manifests in the lack of biodiversity, the lack of the loss of biodiversity, but I think importantly, what's called new diversity, which is just simply cognitive diversity, different ideas, right? When there's only one way to be in the world, and that is Homo economicus, then there's a kind of impoverishment of alternative ways of coexistence. So this making small of the world is also coincident with the kind of eradication of diversity in the world, or the ideal to do so, which is incredibly destructive. So the question, I think, at the heart of this, though, nonetheless, right, and I think maybe it's important to emphasize here, you know, when we're speaking of this planetary turn, or even, like I said, in the words the global, we tend to jump to this giant scale of, like, the cosmos or what have you. And I think it's really important to make it clear that the planetary is actually, it's a multi-scalar phenomena. It is indeed the kind of scale of the atmospheric, but it is also the grain of sand that contains a geohistory, right? So the planetary, rather than being something of a sheer, you know, massive scale, is more of a demand to learn how to think across scales, right? And I think the one thing that I'm quite curious about, if we think about it in terms of this transscalar sort of necessity or interscalar necessity, is to reflect back on some of the legacies that we've certainly imported and or have been influential in the field of art and design, about site specificity, about situating knowledge claims, right? That maybe some of you have heard from the likes of Donna Haraway, et cetera, which have been very important to counter the narrative that somehow, you know, objectivity or scientific objectivity is some neutral, detached, you know, view from above. But rather, we need to, in order to build accountability for the knowledge that we create, we need to be, you know, we need to situate knowledge claims, right? And the one thing that I've, you know, thought is quite problematic, because this is a legacy that came, you know, started about 30 years ago, is to say, okay, so if you say we have situated knowledge claims, I mean, okay, and we can only ever have partial knowledge, and actually the you know, the most sort of robust scientific objectivity is learning how to stitch together our various partialities of knowledge, rather than thinking it's a top-down sort of enterprise. But nonetheless, when we speak about situating knowledge, it does mean that what is that? It's required that we have a site to locate that knowledge. And curiously, in those spatial terms, none of that is addressed in this kind of literature. So it's an interesting, let's say, omission from these texts, that in the end, there's a kind of imported humanism, right, of that Vitruvian man human phenomenological scale that is presumed to be what our, let's say, common sense version of what the boundedness of the site of situating knowledge claims would be. So that's one thing from this situated knowledge claim. But the important thing that I think, again, that Haraway insists on here is, equally echoing this post-critical ethos, right? So it's not enough that we're just showing these radical modes of construction or critiquing scientific knowledge claims, but we need to insist on a better account of reality, of a world, in order to engender accountability for it. Hang on. And yeah, just I think this is an important quote to mention, coming out of the legacy of understanding our field's self-importance as being one where we are we're critical observers of reality, and only doing that. I think we need to also shift into this constructive mode, because as Bell Hooks here says, critique can become merely an expression of a profound cynicism that works to sustain dominator culture, right? So this is kind of echoed in the funny cartoon Shankar Sharma showed of the privileged child whose parents are writing critically about climate change, etc. Right? But I think one aspect of this that I think is quite interesting from this feminist epistemologies, from the situated knowledge to reflect on, and I love the awkwardness of this quote. It's worth saying it twice, but feminist objectivity is about limited location and situated knowledge, not about transcendence and splitting of subject and object. So this is the line here. It allows us to become answerable for what we learn how to see, right? Which is really awkward. So let's say it again. It allows us to become answerable for what we learn how to see. And I love this expression because how to see does not presuppose that whatever we take for granted in terms of sensory immediacy, right? That I hear something, that I see something, it's kind of presupposes a level of mediation that's always going on there, right? So the question is, what are the conditions of how we see or how we witness or how we sense in a planetary condition, is to me infinitely a site of experimentation for the arts and design, because we traffic in the senses. This is our medium. We're there to stimulate, to unsettle the sort of conventions of everyday sensory experience. So, experimenting with techniques of how to see, and by see here, it can be written very large, but how to sense this sort of environment and comment that we live in. And we certainly don't immediately sense it at our particularly human individual scale. And this kind of points to, what we learn how to see also kind of feeds into the way that our sort of conceptual relations to reality impact the way that we approach it, right? So this is a nice quote from C.S. Halling, who wrote a lot about actually the Canadian management of the cod stock fallout off the coast of Newfoundland, which was an environmental catastrophe in its own right. So our traditional view of natural systems might well be less a meaningful reality than a perceptual convenience. So I think this is also a nice quote to remind us, like, what is a perceptual convenience versus how ought we to perceive otherwise. So how am I doing for time here? Because maybe I should wrap up soon, I guess, Autumn. Is that right? I can wrap up on, well, that's perfect. Let's wrap up on this diagram here then. So this was the sort of diagram that, ended up on, right? Because again, to kind of, how do we battle this seeming dichotomy between the way that the planetary is often narrated from an Earth system science perspective, from a kind of position of totality, which is arguably necessary, right? We need to have a sense of the holistic, metabolic, as best as we can, a model of this metabolic condition we live in, where, you know, the atmospheric scale, the terrestrial, the aquatic, biodiversity, all of those things, how do they interact, and to try to understand that as best as we can, versus a compared to the sort of human scale, you know, terrestrial perspective, if you want, that is understood as embedded within this sort of transscalar condition, without doing that, without doing the false step of forcing the Earth into a small world, right? Or forcing the various scales of reality into a human biased sort of scale, right? But rather the question of how do these various scales of reality hang together, and if we are to have these different concepts about reality, how do they affect the mediation of our sensing of this reality, and thereby, you know, our sensing of accountability to one another. Yeah, so basically those are the sets of problems that I'm sort of grappling with, and I can maybe end on this screen here, because this is a small diagram about what does that mean for pedagogy at this point in time, when we're at these kind of interstitial historical moments, where, you know, certainly the knowledge that I gained in my own education, this is not a moment where it's a sheer transmission of that generational knowledge. It's a humility before the unknown of a historical epoch that is coming. And knowing that a lot of the canons that upon which, you know, certainly a person like myself, their training was in, are no longer stable foundations upon which to base the legitimacy of one's practice. So I think those are really, really interesting and humbling stakes at our moment, but they can also be quite playful and experimental. And in fact, the more experiments, the better. So yeah, I will maybe just stop there, and we can take a few minutes for questions, but those were just some of the considerations about how let's say, self-evidence of where the boundedness of the site of our field research, when we start bringing in all these other concepts and considerations, that boundary or that self-evident enclosure of a site is deeply, deeply complicated and a really interesting terrain to think about. And I think, like, thinking at this atmospheric level allows us that transscalar mobility more so than a purely terrestrial understanding of the site.
Okay. Thank you, Patricia. It was really, really rich philosophical insights on locations of atmospherical conditions. Wish we could go on listening to you, and so it's very interesting because especially after Shankar Sharma's you know, insights about what's happening, and yeah, so great. We will have, I think we are almost we have left with very few minutes, and we can have a few questions. Any questions from the students?
It was strategic to go right to the end, because then you you get out of the Q&A.
No, I think we still, you know, we can manage that time.
I think Shankar Sharma has a question.
Okay.
No.
You're muted.
Yes.
Wait, sorry, am I going?
Yeah.
Okay, he's unmuted now. Yeah.
No,
Sir,
let her go. Let her go with the question. First preference
Okay.
to those students.
Okay, Amelia.
Sorry, We had to turn the mic off for a second, so I couldn't hear what was happening. Patricia, my question for you is about this, and thank you very much. I really liked everything you were speaking about. But this notion of working in a post-critical mode of production, I think for us in Eindhoven, it's very interesting and specific in the sense of our course is called the Critical Inquiry Lab. How would you reconcile these like notions of being post-critical in like our work that we do? What does that look like in a material means?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, if I had my ways, it would be the post-critical inquiry lab, but that's a dispute. Maybe I should say that off camera. But no, in all intents and purposes, just to be clear, it doesn't mean acritical, right? Because acritical just means like naive and like just willy-nilly practice. It doesn't mean that. It just means that this, and you're dealing with that with Gijs as well, right? In the sessions you're dealing with, right? But this sort of both the, it's not only the implicatedness in these issues, because we cannot separate ourselves from these topics. It's not like I can point over there and be like, there's climate change and here I am. It's like we're embedded in all of this. So first of all, it's like it would mean criticality without distance, without separability, if you want. But second of all, I think moving beyond the tendency that we saw for the last decades in a lot of artistic or design or even activist campaigns that are really, their end goal is awareness, right? And this is hugely important, and it's not to disavow any of that. I'm not throwing anything under the bus, right? And you certainly need a critical ethos in order to have a very good diagnostics of the problem space you're working in, right? However, that is setting your problem space and just throwing it out there and saying, this is the problem, and then walking away, to me, is like not far enough. And so it's a multi-step commitment, right? Because I think one of the important things about a post-critical ethos, if you wanted to call it something pretentious like that, it would be about following through on the consequences of that diagnosis. So in a critical ethos, you could say, okay, it's enough for me to do the analysis, do the diagnostics, and I'm going to like demonstrate these sets of problems. And then, okay, so here it is. There you go. I'm like, done, And it's like, no, okay, well, if criticality generates knowledge, which it's supposed to do, right? It's supposed to generate insight about a particular phenomena or situation. How does that knowledge impact the way that you re-navigate reality? And what are those, let's say, speculative or propositional steps to navigate based on the consequences of the knowledge that you've gained from a critical perspective? And so that goes beyond awareness, but it's also not propose a solution. That it's not so simple, because I think sometimes people are like, I'm bored, I'm like sick of critique, I want like proposals, but it's also disingenuous to imagine anyone have it. And it's even kind of it's for some of the scale of these problems, it's disingenuous to say like any of us would have a proper policy recommendation, for example. But nonetheless, we can think about the consequences our critical perspectives give us upon reality and ask how they ought to transform, or how they do transform, our relationship to reality, right? And then how that transforms your positionality, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, it's kind of more along those lines to think about the post-critical positioning, if you want.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. That was great to hear, because I feel like a lot of the projects that we're looking at specifically for our individual project really link to these big terms and these big ideologies. And I was feeling overwhelmed by the notion of how do I come up with the solution in the timeline of this project, and is it reductive of me to project my own solution onto such a broad topic? So really happy to hear that it's neither just being critical and bringing awareness to an issue, nor is it like slapping a solution on top of it.
No, definitely not.
Any other questions, sir? Shankar Sharma?
Yeah, my question is related to the topic of Patricia. The word entanglement was not very clear to me as to how it fits in there, because
Mm.
if you are talking about the global climate change and catastrophic consequences, the existential threat to human beings and all that, the word entanglement to me means it has happened to us without either our knowledge or serious efforts. But all this is what has happened around the world is because of our knowledge and our own sustained efforts, basically because there have been many wise people around the globe who have been talking about our overexploitation of nature. For example, Mahatma Gandhi of our own country, way back in 1920s, he has said, if all of us are to have a quality of lifestyle like what America, USA have at that time, then it would be enough to have even two Earths. He said long
Mm.
back in 1920s. But I am referring to my own country, India, where we haven't changed, rather, we have become worse in our exploitation of natural resources. And this is despite the fact that scientists have been telling us again and again and again with very clear evidences, practical examples, and all of that. So,
Mhm.
in that context, I was wondering entanglement. In this case, it has become a wanton one. We have done that. We have, without appreciating the consequences, we have
Mhm.
got entangled into it. So,
Mhm.
would you please explain how the word entanglement fits in there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you raised it because I think that word is deeply abused in our field. And to me, I understand it as you said. First of all, it's an accidental condition, and it's a structural description. I think this is very different from loading it with ethical or normative claims, as it's often done in the design and art field. That when we say, for example, and where we get a notion where entanglement means somehow that we're all in a giant group hug together and facing crisis. No, there's entanglements which are punitive, they're involuntary. We need to try to escape certain of these entanglements, right? So I understand it as a structural condition, which is analogous to a kind of high scale of complexity, because as soon as you start getting, if you think about it as a geometric proposition or a geometric description, rather, when you say something is like entangled, right? It's like high dimensional, it's a high dimensional, complex spatial sort of image or model that comes to mind. So I think it's important to be honest about it's an accidental sort of constitution of our current condition that produces these sorts of interdependencies, but also punitive relationships with each other or harmful relationships with each other and the stuff, biodiversity of the world. But nonetheless, it's because it is a structural condition, and not like a positive one or whatever, right? Like it's not a normative claim; it's a structural claim. It nonetheless does uh, implicate the way that we understand the scope of our activities in the world, right? In which case, even things like the nation state are insufficient structures in order to contain the activities, right? Like you could have the best environmental policy in India, or I mean, well, India is a bad example because there are a lot of people, but let's say in some region. But nonetheless, if the bordering regions beside are continuing to do the same thing, these atmospheric concerns don't respect national sovereign borders, for instance, right? And that to me is like where a kind of structural imaginary of entanglement becomes helpful, because it automatically implicates you in this kind of like high dimensional space of like byproducts and those negative externalities we talked about that force you to kind of understand the implications of certain processes that get unleashed, if that makes sense. But yeah, I would say in short, like that entanglement I understand is a structural description, not a ethical one.
Thank you. See, I can understand the term entanglement in case of a newborn baby, because by no mistake of the baby is already facing a lot of problems. That is entanglement. But for people like you and I who are adults and who are creating more problems to ourselves, I'm not sure whether I should call that I am entangled with the problems around me, because that's on my own design and my own creation. Yeah. But anyway, I understand what you say. It's a larger perspective. Yeah. That seems to be.
And let's say partially undecidable. You know, I mean, in the sense that I could decide to become vegan, not own a car, all these things at a personal level, and that's fine. And it's great to introduce behavioral changes because of responding to these urgencies. But that's like sorry, I lost my thought. I think it's the hour of the day is finally hitting me. But anyways, I think I'll just ramble now.
No, Patricia, there is another question to you. You said your experience working with a lot of people like artists, and you also say that you are a theorist. My question here is, please excuse me, this seems to be a very ignorant question. But the question here is, how do you think people like Aruna and his team, or a lot of artists around us in the world, how do you think they can go on to make a change in how the world views, or other global population or policymakers are thinking of climate change? How do you think they do? You can easily say, what can I do? Because I'm an electrical engineer. I can shut down a lot of power plants and go for renewable energy and all that. But how do you think the artists can really contribute, or how they can make changes? That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, I think well, like I said, I think there's two levels where I think we're both speaking at things, right? Like I think you're really if I understand correctly, like you're really hands-on the like everyday policy level, sort of like level of governance. So there's like this immediate thing which is incredibly important to be fighting for and fighting against in some cases. But then there's also broader questions that I think we do need to entertain in simultaneity, which are about what does governance look like in a planetary condition? We take certain things for granted that are actually like, relatively recent historical developments. We have a nation state as a result of the Westphalian Treaty. You know what I mean? These are like modern ways of organizing the earth, of organizing ourselves together. And I think we need to be able to not demonize each other and say, well, okay, you theorists, you're just off in la la land dreaming of these like speculative scenarios or something like that, compared to people that are doing like immediate on the ground work. But we need to hold these two in a stereoscopic vision and look at how they influence one another, because we have not yet had serious proposals about what governance at a planetary dimension looks like, right? Without that terrifying imaginary of like a totalizing sort of technocratic government or etc. Like no one probably, well, I shouldn't say no one wants that. It's not really the most attractive model to me, to be honest. But so I'm saying that I think that we need to be able to work on multiple fronts, both on this like practical policy level. Artists are also just normal human beings. We can also go and, protest. We can do activities as just normal human beings outside of our practice, right? Not everything needs to be couched in art. But then I also think about figures like literary figures like Octavia Butler, for example, whose literary, science fiction is from, let's say, the 80s and 90s is prescient for our moment, right? Does she write and influence policy? No, but she contributes to imaginaries. I'm thinking of Kim Stanley Robinson, who's also a kind of known as a cli-fi writer who works extensively with the most up-to-date, climate data, etc., and like models different futural governance, urban scenarios, etc., that are kind of plausible, right? And these are ways that, because we are narrative creatures, right? That's the thing that I didn't get to talk about today, but we're not just like bio creatures who need water and air to survive. We survive on narrations. We survive on the stories we tell about ourselves, about our possible futures, about the way we describe one another, right? Like even interhuman levels are not doing so well in terms of our difference at this particular moment. And so we do need this level of storytelling and mediations in order to participate in this general shift, I think, and to be humble about what those contributions are, but also understand that, you know, just as you suggested, we can each individually do some small transformation, and that, you know, in an agglomerative way has an effect. So too, I think we can understand the humbleness of our, we don't need to have this hubristic thing of my work is going to save the world. No, but we can understand as being committed to these issues. We can understand them as participating in ushering the narrative for these other worlds, other historical conditions. And so I do think, without sounding like inflationary or just as a design school blurb of changing the world, no, we don't want that, but we can humbly be participating in these kinds of activities and building solidarities in doing so.
Thank you very much. I can appreciate how some senior professional like Aruna can contribute in this regard, because I have seen his own beautiful work. He has done a lot of work on climate change, putting up a lot of. You haven't come to his place here in Karnataka in India. He has done a lot of like. But my question here is, you're using the word storytelling, narratives, and all that. Like my question here is much more fundamental. For example, let's say take a kind of a nuclear power. And the world has seen three horrible disasters: Three Mile Island, USA, Chernobyl in Russia, and Fukushima. Now, everybody has seen what has happened there, including the government, including the policy makers, including people like you and I. But still, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the agency that is the government of United Nations, they are advocating for more of nuclear power plants. And none of them are assuring us that there won't be any nuclear accident. We have better technology. No, as you know, there is no civil nuclear insurance available. None of the agencies can give you insurance against nuclear disability or nuclear accidents. So the question here is, they know they don't require any narrative, they don't require any examples. They already have that, but still they want to go with that. Same thing with coal power, same thing with dams. My question here is, how do people like us, and of course artists, I can argue strongly on basis of my experience, some statistical information, data, and all of that. But how do you think that artists, youngsters especially, can contribute to this?
Well, I mean, first of all, yeah, there's disputes around the nuclear issue, so it's not so simple. And it was Chernobyl's was the Ukrainian catastrophe. I mean, I'm not here to just get into that dispute, but I think it's also not so simple as you know, I'm thinking of Germany, for example. After Fukushima, they shut down the plants, and now digging coal again. So okay, you know, it's not so straightforward. You know, to imagine that any energy process or any technological innovation, you know, as they say, always precipitates an accident. So the invention of the, you know, the famous quip that the invention of the stock market is also invention of the crash, which is to say there's no risk-free anything. So I think, you know, I would just kind of preface it like that. So yes, these are all, you know, things need to be mitigated as a risk, you know, in terms of like, honestly adjudicating the risk factors that are there. And so, but on this topic specifically, like I mean, I don't really have a sufficient answer, because it seems like that's very agenda based. You know, it's just like that's one specific issue that people could get involved with. as they see fit. There's certainly people that are very much wanting to shut down the nuclear plants that exist. But I don't feel like the arts is really it's not necessarily there for the issue specific things. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so yeah, I don't know if that's a sufficient answer, but I felt like it's almost like picking a particular facet of this crisis that we face as a energy, for example, and then looking to the arts to illustrate that or to get behind that issue. And I don't really understand, the arts as doing that specific policy level advocacy type of work. That's maybe more the domain of activism, but again, it's yeah, it's an insufficient answer, but I don't really understand I wouldn't, let me put it this way. I wouldn't orient my own practice to like a particular issue of like, okay, I'm going to be anti-nuclear and my artistic activity is going to be talking about that. It'll be encompassing a different realm. So it's not getting into the illustrative mode or let's say very hyper literal mode, if that makes sense.
No, I picked up nuclear only as an example. It can happen to coal plant, it can happen to large renewable energy sources, energy storage, batteries, large dams. For example, Aruna has displayed in his memoriam all the associated issues leading to climate change. My question was basically, even when the policymakers, the experts, they know what is happening, they know the statistical, they know the processes, which process is leading to what. Despite all of that, they are continuing in the same the paradigm of a high GDP growth rate, economic growth, and all of that, which is leading to climate change. My question was how the budding artists can start contributing to that in addition to their professional engagement.
Yeah. We deeply need anti-capitalist narratives. We need deep anti-capitalist imaginaries, right? And which is precisely why we need to go, in this post-critical mode of just merely naming the sort of source or ethos of this of what brought us into this condition. But we need to start imagining different modes of evaluation, different modes of coexistence, which produce different commitments to each other, different commitments to reality, including natural reality, right? Because at this moment, that framework for understanding understanding one's place in the world, one's function, etc., is like really predicated upon these particular frames of reference, right? Which is what I was getting to with that cosmological thing, right? These general orientation is driven by a decision that, economic growth is a form of glory, right? So what does it mean to operate from without that cosmological predisposition? And what sort of other factors would be influencing decision, etc., right? But those require like imaginary modelings in order to be shareable, right? Outside of just your personal universe. And I think that's like a role, a humble role that the arts can definitely play. The one equation we haven't spoken about, except in terms of like actual energy, but we'll drop it because I know we're really over time, is the issue of power. And I think that's really under theorized in this particular moment. We're still running on, let's say, philosophical pictures of power in political philosophy that are like decades out of date. And we need to have a proper understanding of how power operates today in order to account for, how our worlds are being shaped. And it's not as simple as money is power. You know what I'm saying? Like there's something more at stake there that I think needs to be more robustly understood in order to have a counteracting potential effect upon it.
Okay, I think we
Thank
have
you.
run out
We
of
can go
time.
on and on on
Yes.
those issues.
Mhm.
I think Aruna has come to call
Yeah.
it a day. That's fine.
I think we have a question from Emilia. I think that will be the last question, I believe. Priyesh? Emilia, are you there?
No, I don't have a question anymore. To Priyesh, I interrupted them before, so
Okay.
mic over to them.
So,
I think your question was very nice. It opened up quite a lot. Thank you so much, Patricia, for the presentation. I was thinking of something while you were mentioning planetary, and it is yet to be unfolded in the world or worldly. I was thinking of Heidegger's idea of earthly and worldly, and how he says that earth has to be unfolded in the world. And if we have taken this in a way that the understanding of earth has become extractive, maybe the understanding of planetary would be something else. Maybe that can be a solution to this. So I was trying to place these three in the equation of earthly, worldly, and the planetary. So maybe that is something I thought of.
Yeah, it's I'm glad you didn't let me get away with the non-citation of Heidegger with worlding, because of course he's the one who invents it. I just happen to not be a fan of Heidegger, to put it very mildly. But yeah, I think how I understand the worlding operation, just to be very clear, because I do think it's a bit dangerous that it's coming from when it's taken from a purely Heideggerian space, right? We know his background is terrible, right? Like a full-on Nazi endorser and so on. So, and I'm also quite nervous about this romanticization of, let's say, a sort of pre-technological or pre-modern sort of thing that's going on in Heidegger. It's a very, very anti-technological. And I'm very wary of narratives that are about glorifying a past as if it's better. I mean, we see that literal narrative today, and the political destruction it does. Make America great again is the same tendency, right? So what I mean by worlding is simply that we have, we have conceptual models of worlds, and the activity of worlding is manifesting those models into reality. And that is done often by, that's done technologically, that's done, which are also a kind of infusion of our conceptual predispositions, an infusion of our self-storytelling, right? All of those sorts of factors. So to me, when you get into this kind of operations of like world building, world making, worlding, there's other, I think, thinkers that are more helpful to think through than the Heideggerian one, which I'm very nervous about. Well, not nervous. I disavow completely, because I think it's precisely those forces that are actively making it quite a negative operation. But if you think of something like Nelson Goodman, ways of world making, right? Like worlds are born from the worlds that are already at hand. So worlding is always a remaking of the world. And that also helps us get away from, let's say, Euromodernist obsessions with novelty, as if novelty is a, out of the blue, from nowhere thing, which is very often how technological solutionism is narrated, right? Like, oh, we can continue on, and don't worry, guys, a big innovation is going to happen, and we can just carry on with all this kind of let's say excess, if you want. So I think like sorry, it's like the 3 a.m. wake up time is hitting me now. But yeah, so this like the idea of like world making, remaking from the stuff already at hand is to me really useful, because it's also, again, when you're coming as a practitioner, it's like, it's also a transformation of the ready-made, if you want to put it really in our disciplinary terms as artists, right? Let's say we're in this Duchampian, we're still in a kind of Duchampian critical art paradigm characterized by the ready-made. And so the interesting thing for me is to say, okay, well, the ready-made was just like taking something of the existing world and reframing it. But it's like, what does it mean to do the recomposition, right? Because that's the kind of imperative behind a world-making ethos. It's like working from the ruins, basically, if you want to put it in those like Anna Tsing kind of terms, the mushroom at the end of the world sort of framing. But what does it mean to acknowledge the stuff at hand and do that sort of transformative recombinatorial work, which I think at a small scale is very interesting from a materials perspective as artists. But then when you kind of scale up to something like infrastructure, for example, the same logic behind the question is what types of infrastructure could be repurposed for different ends, or are they all like contaminated by capitalism and can never be used for anything else besides profit driven, right? And so how would we go and evaluate those various, infrastructural entities in the world to see if they could be repurposed for equitable or just ends, for instance. So I think the worlding stuff I'm interested in is much more on the Nelson Goodman side of the remaking of the worlds already at hand. Again, to kind of exit that novelty problem, but also not to fall into the Heideggerian trap. Again, for me, it's a trap. I mean, other people have different pictures, but I'm not in any way endorsing like, let's turn back to some glory days or whatever, where, I didn't have a right to vote and would have 17 children right now, or be dead. So I don't want to glorify that time either,
Thank you so much, Patricia.
So, yeah, I think are we done for this day, Priyesh? Are we?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Patricia and Mr. Shankar Sharma, sir, for this wonderful afternoon session. I wish we had more time for more discussion. I don't think that is possible in this session. So thank you so much.
Thanks for moderating, Arun, and look forward to seeing you all on Monday.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thanks, Arun.
Have a
Thanks,
lovely
everyone.
weekend.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Chris?
Before everybody
Yes,
leaves, I
yes.
would just like to ask the students to stay on for 1 second for some practical discussion. Maybe this is also a moment where we can stop the recording. And I think
I will just ask them to. IT से कौन होगा? आशीष जी?
And also, if you can, this is also a moment for everyone to turn on your camera so we can just say hi or see you as well. If you have 2 more minutes, maybe we can just use that time also to check in a little bit, like how is it going, and if everything was clear from previous instructions and emails, more on the practical side of things. Also, I want to take this moment to thank Patricia and unfortunately our other guest has already left for this talk that this early in the morning. So I'm just curious to know how is it going, and if you managed to connect with your groups, if you need some more information, or if you have any general questions to us as your tutors. But I think a lot of people have already left.